Hello guys, and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be talking about some of the healing changes that are going to be announced for this reset October 29th, depending on which region you're in. We're going to talk about the changes, how they're going to impact Mythic Plus. Are they good, are they bad? How are the healers, or what is the state of healers currently? Let's go and get started. And let's go and start off with Restoration Druids, who are also getting more changes. Call of the Elder Druids duration is increased to 15 seconds, used to be 10 seconds. Dream of Sonaris now causes Wrath and Shred to transfer 100%, used to be 50%, of their damage done into healing, and Starfire and Swipe transfers 50% of the damage done into healing. Now, you might be reading this and you might be unsure about these talents, because these talents are not really being used by Resto Druids regardless of the content you're doing. Now, at the start of the War Within beta, these new talents were introduced and they kind of promoted this interesting gameplay, again, depending on who you ask, in terms of doing damage, and a portion of that damage is being transferred into healing. Because these changes, in my eyes, are primarily aimed at Mythic Plus content, I am looking at Murloc.io, which is honestly another site that looks at real play information. It basically looks at like the top 50 of each spec and looks at their talents, looks at their gear and all those things. And you can see right now that we talked about Call of the Elder Druid and we talked about Dream of Sonaris is not really getting a whole lot of gameplay. And I think there's a reason for this, because right now, if you're doing really high keys as Restoration Druid, you're probably fully aware that you need to constantly heal. Actually, it doesn't even matter if it's Resto Druid, any healer who's doing really high keys, there are dungeons out there where you need to output 1 million overall healing, because there's so much healing needed. You don't really have a whole lot of time to do anything else. Now, it really does depend on the dungeon and things like that, and if you do opt into these talents, there will be moments when you have to step out, you have to focus on other things. For example, right now, Resto Druid's bread and butter healing when it comes to Mythic Plus content is applying HOTS and then letting your regrowth doing the heavy lifting. And I know this is not relevant for this week's patch notes, but for the 20th anniversary, there were quite a few new talents being introduced for Resto Druids, and you can see them being picked up in Mythic Plus. Things like Wildwood Roots. You can see things like Forest Flow being picked up by a lot of people. Things like Renewing Surge. So Resto Druid talent choices have changed a little bit. What do I think about the buffs? I'm looking forward to try them out, especially because I'm gearing my Resto Druid. It's a bit of a rat. I'm going to try it out in lower keys where there's not that much healing needed. I'm going to try this out and see how much healing I can get from optimizing my Heart of the Wild, optimizing my DPS. Do I expect a lot of top-end Resto Druids picking up these talents in really high keys where there's a lot of healing needed? I'm not sure. I'm going to test it out, but I'm happy that Blizzard is trying to make some of the talents that people are not picking make it more viable, and I think that's only a good thing right now. And now let's go to Mistweaver Monk, which honestly this week has received probably the most changes, and I think it's very deserving of it. So first of all healing is increased by 6%. I think a lot of Mistweaver Monks were waiting for something like this. Awakened Jadefire now causes Spinning Crane Kick to transfer 110% of damage to him instead of 90. Jadefire Teachings now increases Ancient Teachings by additional 160 instead of 140. Rushing Wind Kick, which is the new talent that came in the 20th anniversary patch. Rushing Wind's kick damage increased by a whopping 150, and Rushing Winds now increases the Renewing Mist healing by 100% for its duration instead of 50. Yulon's Whisper's healing increased by 400%, and this is the first nerf, and I think this is a pretty... Again, let me know how I feel about this, but Jade Bond now increases Mastery Gust of Mist healing by 20%, used to be 60%. Now, Jade Bond is something that is not really used by Mistweaver Monks in Mythic Plus content, but it is used by Mistweaver Monks in Raid for certain bosses, and we'll talk about that. Actually, we'll talk about it right now. So now let's look at Mythic HPS logs for Narrowbar's Palace. Now we're looking at, again, this is 75 percentile. You can go to 95 percentile. It's going to be somewhat similar as well. We're looking at 75 in terms of being a bit more average, but at the end of the day, the HPS numbers are somewhat similar. Now, HPS is not a defining factor in terms of making a healer perfect or amazing, because there's a lot of healers who have damage reduction and things like that, but Mistweaver Monk doesn't really have a whole lot going on, and again, I don't want to be too mean about this right now because there are multiple reasons. So first of all, Monk is kind of trailing behind in terms of HPS, and Monk in my eyes is a healer that is going to live or die based on HPS, because again, in Dragonflight you did have more utility. You used to have Generous Pour, you used to have Close to Heart. Most people don't even know about these class 3 talents because they don't show up on healing meters. But if they did show up in terms of healing meters, in terms of Warcraft logs, if you did account for the HPS or healing increases or the avoidance that it provided, it would actually be pretty significant, especially in content where there's a lot of, again, where there's a lot of members or close to you, because the proximity of those buffs were relatively short. But generally speaking, Monk had more utility in Dragonflight. In the War Within, they lost quite a few things, and the replacement buffs or changes, in my eyes, were not strong enough. So Monk right now in raid situations is not really providing a good amount of HPS. It's not really providing a huge amount of utility that other healers or other classes can provide or can bring instead. Again, I do have to mention, monks have Mystic Touch, which will guarantee you a raid spot if you're the only one monk. In Mythic Plus, Mystic Touch is not as amazing as people make it out to be, even though, like, you have to consider a lot of melee classes out there, a lot of their damage might still be coming from magical sources. So I'm really happy that Blizzard is trying to address the HPS issues with Mistweaver Monk, because we talked about the utility and the lack of utility for Mistweaver Monks, especially when compared to Dragonflight. But if you look at some of the fights, again, Jade Bond is getting nerfed. So if you look at some of the fights where Mistweaver Monks are doing really well and they're picking Jade Bond, things like Brute Twister right now, Mistweaver Monks are doing really well. And if you look at some of the talent choices, and you can see this is the most popular talent build for Mythic Brute Twister, and you can see there's a very specific build here with all of the Mistweaver Monks picking up Jade Bond and all of the Mistweaver Monks picking up Red Crane, and this is getting nerfed. But overall, I think a lot of Mistweaver Monks are going to be happy with the changes here. But I still think there are a couple of things to be addressed with Mistweaver Monks specifically. Again, we talked about utility, maybe the lack of utility, the loss of utility that you received from Dragonflight, going from Dragonflight into the War Within. Let me know how you feel about these changes as a Mistweaver Monk. Now let's go to Holy Paladin. And Holy Paladins are getting nerfs. And again, this has caused a lot more controversy again. I think Holy Paladin changes throughout the patches have been, a lot of people have been questioning the decision choices, and we'll talk about it. So first of all, Beacon of Virtue now costs 5% base mana instead of 4%, and Holy Shock now costs 2.8% base mana instead of 2.6%. So your mana consumption is going to be, it's going to be worse. Now, this does not affect all builds in the same way. Again, in developer's note, Holy Paladin mana has been plentiful enough to use Beacon of Virtue more often than we like throughout a raid encounter. You have to keep in mind, there are multiple builds for Holy Paladins, especially have been emerging over the last couple of patches. Let's go and look at them. So we see right now is real play information in terms of top HPS Holy Paladins for each of the bosses and in terms of what builds they're using. You can see right now Lightsmith, specifically AC or Avenging Crusader Lightsmith, is the way to go. It is the most popular raiding build right now, and a lot of Holy Paladins are running it. A lot of Holy Paladins are happy about the shift for AC. A lot of Holy Paladins are not happy about this. Really, let me know. Do you enjoy this new gameplay in terms of using Avenging Crusader? I really want to know your opinion. And again, a lot of the times when running this build, you might not be running Beacon of Virtue, you might not be pressing Holy Shock all that often. So the mana constraints that are being added in this patch or this weekly reset, they're not really going to affect Holy Paladin, Lightsmith, AC build all that much. The other build, which is lacking behind, Herald of the Sun, that is going to be impacted a lot more. And this is why Holy Paladins are kind of questioning this decision. Just take a little step back and look at it this way. Imagine you're playing a certain healer or certain class or whatever, and you have a top build that is doing really well and is performing really nicely, and you're like, okay, Blizzard is issuing a nerf, but the nerf is targeting a build that is not as popular, that is not as good. And then you're further pushed into playing that top one build. And this is why people are like, what is going on here? Because there's a lot of Holy Paladins who don't want to be pushed into playing AC. They don't want to play Avenging Crusader. They want to have a valid choice between playing AC Lightsmith build and playing something else in terms of maybe Herald of the Sun and the normal Wings build. And Blizzard is kind of pushing you into playing what is already strong. So this is why that is causing a lot of issues. This is why it's really hard to understand why they're doing this. This is why a lot of people are questioning a lot of decisions about Holy Paladin. Let me know how you feel about these changes, and I really want to know your opinion. Do you like that Lightsmith AC build right now that you're seeing? Is it something that you enjoy, or do you want to go back to the old style wing type of gameplay that you saw with Herald of the Sun? Let me know. And now let's go have a look at changes or buffs to Discipline Priest. Power Radiance, healing increased by 20%. Flash Heal, healing increased by 15%. Premonition of Piety increases healing done by 20%, used to be 15%. And Preemptive Care increases atonement duration by 4 seconds instead of 3 seconds. So you're getting buffs to Oracle, and again, very much wanted, because I think if you're Discipline Priest, you're fully aware that Void Weaver is absolutely running away with it in all forms of content. Most of Discipline Priests are going to be running that. So Blizzard decided to do some buffs to Oracle. I'm not sure, or I don't think this is going to really tip the scales in terms of the hero build usability. I still think Discipline Priests are going to be running Void Weaver for most of the content out there, but I think it's important that Blizzard is trying to keep them in line, or try to keep them in line every single week. Maybe there's going to be more buffs. Overall, Discipline Priests, again, let's look at raid performance. Now, if you look at the pure HPS chats right now, you might ask yourself, why is Discipline Priest getting buffed? Why is Blizzard not touching Holy Priest? If Discipline Priest is getting buffed, why are they not looking at healers below this? If you look at some of the HPS charts in like 95 percentile, you'll see even a bigger increase, and you're asking yourself what is going on here. Now, you also have to look at the fact that in terms of playability, in terms of how many players are playing Holy Priest versus Discipline Priest, again, you'll see the numbers in terms of Holy and you'll see the numbers in terms of Disc. It's absolutely crazy. And there are certain boss fights where your local Discipline Priest might be asked to play Holy Priest instead for multiple different reasons. But overall, I am more excited, and again, I'm not really looking about these changes. I'm looking at the shift of Discipline Priest when it comes to Mythic Plus content, and we're going to talk about that in the Mythic Plus section of the video, and I'm honestly really excited for that. Let's go look at the rest of the healer changes. The last changes are going to be for Restoration Shaman. So there has been buffs to Farseer. Now, Farseer Ancestor Chain Lightning damage increased by a whopping 40%, and Farseer Ancestor Lava Burst damage increased by 15%. So the DPS of, again, playing Farseer is going to be substantially increased. Now, keep in mind, a lot of Resto Shamans are out there playing Totemic. I think Farseer is still very viable and it's still very fun. I've been playing Farseer a lot more lately, and I'm looking forward to try out these DPS buffs. Now, keep in mind, as a Restoration Shaman, let's say in Mythic Plus content, you're playing Totemic, you're getting a lot of DPS value out of your Surging Totem because you just place it and leave it there, and your Acid Rain is going to do a lot of damage, and you can just focus on other things like healing or maybe throwing in some DPS spells. For Farseer, in order to optimize your damage, in my eyes, you have to decide when you want to sacrifice your healing and go into DPS because you want to, for example, spam Chain Lightning or whatever. And I think it requires a little more effort and a little bit of more preparation in order to optimize your damage as Farseer, and I am really enjoying the fact that they're going to reward you for this. Now, if you actually find the time to DPS as a Farseer, whether it's going to be Chain Lightning, whether it's going to be Lava Burst, activating your Ancestors, maybe activating your double Ancestors with Ancestral Swiftness and things like Unleash Life, and then just pumping your Chain Lightning in AoE packs. The fact that you're going to be rewarded for that, I think is actually really fun. Let me know how you feel about Restoration Shaman changes. Let me know. Do you like Totemic or Farseer more? So now let's look what it means to healers. We're going to start off with Raid, and in Raiding, I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of changes. You have to first remember Holy Paladin, Mana nerfs are not really going to affect Holy Paladin all that much because most of them are running Lightsmith, AC, or Avenging Crusader builds. A lot of them might not be running Virtue, a lot of them might not be pressing Holy Shock as much as or as often. So nothing's really going to change the Holy Paladin in my opinion. Again, there's no changes to Preservation of Evoker. Resto Druid changes are mainly aimed at Mythic Plus in my opinion, and even then I'm not 100% sure about them. Resto Shaman, there's been Farseer buffs, which again is great, but it's Farseer damage buffs. Most of the Resto Shamans are still probably going to be running Totemic in Raid and probably Totemic in Mythic Plus as well. And Discipline Priest received some buffs, and I think they're going to climb a little bit, which again is nice to see. Holy Priest didn't receive any changes so far, and Mistweaver Monk received probably the most changes. And Mistweaver Monks should expect an increase, but keep in mind, the Blizzard has focused specifically on Mistweaver builds that were using Jade Bond and Synergy with Red Crane, and they're nerfing those, which were extremely popular for mythic bosses like Brute Twister. So overall, I don't think it's going to shift everything too crazy. I think certain specs are going to climb a little bit higher. I think certain specs are going to stay where they are, but let's go and have a look at Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus, in my opinion, where it kind of got very interesting in the last week or so. So you can see here, this is spec diversity in the top 2000 Mythic Plus keys. And again, this is for each week, and you can see how Resto Shaman is kind of climbing and dominating everything. And then this is the anniversary week, and this is where things have started to shuffle a little bit. So first of all, Protection, and this is very relevant, Protection Paladin climbed immensely because of the changes that happened in the last patch and things like that. Protection Paladin is absolutely bonkers strong right now, which synergizes really well with a couple of other healers. So you can see Resto Shaman dipped from 82% to 64%, and you can see the representation right here. Resto Shaman is still very much a top Mythic Plus healer, and I don't think that's going to change unless Blizzard is really going to, how do I say, gut their utility in some shape or form, which I'm not sure if they want to do that, but I definitely had seen the climb of Discipline Priest. You can see right now Prot Paladin is doing really well. Discipline Priest or Priests in general don't have an intro, but Prot Paladin can really kind of fix those issues. So right now, my advice would be that if you're someone who's looking to poke really high Mythic Plus keys and you want to play the game, you want to get invited, Resto Shaman is still the number one choice, because let's be honest, if you're pugging 12, 13, 14 keys, if they're gonna see a bunch of Resto Shamans, they're gonna pick a Resto Shaman because you're not using a Discord. Resto Shaman has so much utility, interrupt, all those things. I think it's an easy, safe pick. But if you're someone who's pushing really high-end Mythic Plus content in an organized group, and you're able to fill in the gaps of a disc, I think disc is slowly emerging as the second best healer. And I think it's going to climb, actually. Of course, keep in mind, this is looking at the highest keys in the world. If you're not doing that, you really should not worry about this. You should play whichever healer you enjoy the most. But I definitely believe that the rise of Prot Paladin is going to help out Discipline Priest, or Priest in general. I think Discipline Priest right now is doing really well. I think the numbers, the DPS, the healing can be really good. And again, you don't have the same utility as Resto Shaman, but you do have things like PI, Fortitude, and things like that. And if your group can account for your missing utility, you can do, or you can perform really well. Again, Discipline Priest, my advice for people who have an organized group that can optimize Discipline Priest value. If you're poking, Resto Shaman is the king. And in terms of other healers, I think Resto Druid changes have been pretty nice. I think Resto Druid is not as bad as people make it out to be, because it's received so much aura buffs. I haven't had the time to test out some of the new talents, but I do think Resto Druid, I had a good time with Resto Druid so far, but I'm not pushing really high keys. Keep in mind, there's other specs of Druid that are doing well as well and could jeopardize your position or your invites. But you might say to yourself, hey MadSkillz, what about Resto Shaman? They have to compete with Elemental and Enhancement, which are honestly some of the top tier DPS specs right now. I know they're going through a lot of changes, but Resto Shaman provides something that other Shaman specs cannot, and that is a sizable HP increases through talents like Ancestral Vigor and Downpour. But my guesses and predictions for the future is that Blizzard could very likely look at these HP increases the Resto Shaman provides and tune them down or nerf them, because every single week they're trying to create better balance, and I think Resto Shaman will forever be on their list as long as it has such a high representation in Mythic Plus. And then of course you have the sad state of Preservation of Evoker right now, which is not indicative of their performance, because if you play Preservation of Evoker, you're probably fully aware of the amount of healing, the damage you can do, and it can be a very, very strong healer. But no one's playing Preservation of Evoker. Preservation of Evoker has to battle with Augmentation of Evoker for certain invites, and it always happens with Preservation of Evoker is that no one ends up playing it, even if it is a very solid or a good healer. And again, I do have to say that range limitations and things like that do play a part in this. I've been talking about range limitations for a long time, but I'm not going to harp on about this. And of course, Holy Priest is probably the least played healer right now, and that is partly due to the fact that Discipline Priest is the superior counterpart right now, at least in Mythic Plus content. In raiding content, you could make a lot of different arguments, but Discipline Priest is getting buffs. So I think it's very interesting to look at some of these charts in terms of how the healers are changing. Again, Mistweaver Monk is getting buffs, but at the end of the day, I still think Monk is missing some of that utility we talked about. Again, you used to have Generous Spore, you used to have Close to Heart, which I'm not saying are great ways of implementing utility, because they were very range restrictive. They were, again, a lot of times they might not be fun to play around, because hey, if someone is standing closer to me, I'm doing more healing. If they're not standing close to me, then I'm doing less healing. It's not a fun, really, gameplay interaction, so I can almost agree why they removed it, but I don't think they gave you, how do I say, comparative replacements. So I still think Mistweaver Monk could benefit from some additional utility. I think Monk is extremely fun to play, but I still believe that Restoration Shaman is going to be the #1 choice when it comes to POG and high-end Mythic Plus content. But I think Discipline Priest is going to be a clear second choice if things are going to continue the way that they are. And this kind of concludes the video, and I really want to know your opinion about how do you feel about the healer changes that have been announced? How do you feel about the healer meta when it comes to maybe specifically Mythic Plus content? Because I think that is a very, very vocal community that is unhappy about some of the class balance that is happening right now. Let me know how you feel about all of this. If you like this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.